Okay, let's begin. We finished there Taanit Ketzad. We finished the second perek last time. We are on Yurchet Amud Bet. If you're following in the art scroll, that would be on 18b4. Okay? So let's just do a review, because in order to kind of get back to where we were, we need to review what it was that we learned and where the Mishnah is actually coming back in. So we already discussed this idea that there's a progression of how when the fasts, when the rains don't come for a long enough time, it gets worse and worse and worse, and then we start adding, number one, more. We add a 3 and a 3 and a 7, and the fasts themselves are also, as they go, they're progressively more strict in terms of the length of the fast, in terms of the stores opening, in terms of what we do in the prayer service, the additions we have to the tefillah. So each one of those things, they kind of go further and further and further, and all of that is dealt with, at least according to what we learned thus far, when the rain didn't come by a certain date. So we're talking about the original rain, and that first rain doesn't come. Now, what if there's other issues or problems? A rain is not the only natural calamity that there is, or lack of rain. There could be many other things that we might need to pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or that we need to fast for. So what happens in a situation when there's something that's immediate and it's an emergency? So I don't know, there's a tornado, whatever it is, we'll come to it. So we can skip. We don't need to go from the 1, 2, 3. The first set, the second set, the third set. But actually, we could jump straight into the most strict fasts right away, which again makes sense. Lack of rain is something which falls under the natural patterns and phenomena. Like sometimes it rains a little bit later. We need it to rain. We're asking God. It's like a gentle nudge and a reminder, saying, Hashem, we're down here. We need you, etc., etc. But when it comes to something which is an active calamity and it's happening right now, so maybe there's something different. So the Mishnah actually addresses and justifies this exact thought process. Seder ta'anuyot elu. The order of the fast that we had up until this point, b'revi'ah rishona, when the first revi'ah, the first rain does not come, right, and it gets delayed. Aval tzmachim sheshanu. What if, as an example, we have something farmers start realizing that all the crops, the trees, the grains, whatever, they're not growing in a normal way. They're growing too short. They're growing in weird, in strange ways, etc., etc. And they realize that this kind of strange thing that's happening, or they're not growing properly, or it's growing too many thorns alongside the crop. So they're realizing that the problem here might be something which could ruin the entire crop. And in the case like that, so we don't have the time to kind of slowly fix it with more rain. But what do? Matri'in alehem miyad. We start immediately crying out. We pray for these things. What if there's no rain between the first rain and the second rain? There's a 40-day hiatus of no rain. 40 days without rain is a long time, right? Matri'in alehem. We immediately jump into the stronger form of calling out, which is the most strict fast. Because that problem is a problem not of irrigation. It's not a problem in the process of growth. It's a problem which is going to manifest itself in supply chain issues. You're not going to have actual food. You're going to have a famine. People are going to be starving. What if the rains came and it fell for tzimachim, avalo yadu la'ilan? It didn't come for the trees. That could be true in amount or in timing, right? Or le'ilan velo tzimachim, or for trees and not for crops. Lazeh ulazeh, or it fell for both of them. Avalo leborot nesechil me'arot, but not enough to fill up the wells, the pits. People at the time, if you lived near a river or near some sort of water source, you could go get that water. Or if you lived near underground streams, you could dig a well. But what if a person was relying on reservoir-like water? So each one of these things, borot, sichin, me'arot, they represent another form of water storage that they would use in order to be able to have the water. So in those cases, they needed the water, they needed those things filled. So even if I have enough for my vegetables, but not for my trees, not my vegetables, my trees and my vegetables, but not for my water storage systems, I'm in a terrible situation. And if that's the case, then matrin alehen miyad. Also, we would read, we would do everything we need to do immediately. You have a town that the rain did not fall on that specific town. Okay? The pasuk says that there is such a reality, and that's literally a punishment from God, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chilka ahati mater, you could have one person's portion, one person's field, rain, and another one not. Ota ha'ir, that city, mit'ana u'mitrat, that city fasts and immediately skips to the most stringent fasts right away. And all the surrounding cities, mit'anot lo matriot, they fast, but they do not have the more severe crying out as well. Why is it connected if they don't have the problem? The answer is supply and demand indicates that you're going to have the problem. Because immediately, if your city is now obligated or is now going to be carrying the burden of feeding two cities, number one, pak'ah sha'arim, the price of food is going to go up. Number two, there might not be enough. So they have a lower level of fasting, but not the form of crying out on the level that we said earlier. That's one pshat. Another pshat is that it's some sort of a sympathy fast. You know, this is your problem, but still, I'm going to fast alongside you. Another answer possibly is that when a person sees their neighbor getting punished, then they also have to wonder and worry if they're going to come next. So it's a preventative tefillah. Why? As we say in the Mishnah, oy l'rasha, oy l'shcheno. Woe is to someone who is a rasha, woe is to their neighbor. If I'm the neighboring town from a city that got punished, maybe I'm next. Not only that, maybe part of the reason why they're getting punished is to send us a message. So in order to do that, they would make sure to have an ounce of prevention rather than a pound of cure. So the surrounding cities, they would fast. Mit'anot lo matriot. Rabbi Akiva Omer, no, the opposite. What's harder? It's harder to fast. Matriot lo mit'anot. In fact, no, they cry out. They have the extra elements of the tefillot, of the blowing of the shofar, but they don't fast. V'chein ir, so to a city, sheyesh ba dever or mapolet, it has in it a plague, or mapolet, or it has within it a collapse of buildings. All right, let's say they have a typhoon or they have hurricanes or whatever. Ota ha'ir mit'ana u'mitrat. That city, they would fast and they would do the crying out along with the shofar with the special prayers. And everyone around him, just like the Tanakh Kama said before, surrounding cities would fast but not cry out. Rabbi Akiva Omer, matriot lo mit'anot, same exact thing. Rabbi Akiva says no, they're matria, but they're not mit'aneh. Now, I just want to point out something which I thought was interesting here. When it comes to this situation, when we say mapolet, Rashi says, if you look at the second to last wide line at the top, o mapolet, shechomotea v'habatim, that its walls and the houses noflim baruach, are falling in the wind. Okay, other mifarshim add to the wind other natural type of disasters. Okay, earthquake type. Now the question is, September 11th, we had two of the greatest mapolets maybe the world has ever seen. Would the halakha apply that New York City at that time should be mit'aneh matriya? It's a man-made disaster.
It seems like it's supernatural.
Sorry?
It seems like it's supernatural.
It seems like they're all now. So my first thought was, okay, maybe they didn't have kamikaze bombers. But the truth is, even if they didn't, they had marauders They had conquering armies. They had people that lit buildings on fire, right? So they had things.
But if you use Rashi's explanation that it's for wind, you would seemingly think it's more natural, like Rafi said.
No, that's my point. My point is Rashi says wind. Then the other Rishonim come along and they add other natural disasters, almost like they're trying to exclude a man-made disaster. But why would that be the case? We as Jews believe that ultimately, if we did not deserve the punishment, no, they would not be able to carry out against us. Right? Even Amalek, unless the Jewish people, unless we give the power to, with our sins, right? Like the Pasuk says, the people, they fought with Refidim, right? They fought with Amalek after they left Refidim. What's Refidim? Says Rashi, Rafu yedehem min Torah. Their hands became weaker in Torah and mitzvot. So therefore there was an opening for Amalek. What that means to me is that these types of things could not happen if we were operating on the level of Torah, Ma'asim Tovim, that we were supposed to be. So in which case, the response to that should be Teshuvah, Taanit, Matriya.
But maybe Taanit and Matriya is not the avenue for reconciling that punishment.
There we go. So maybe the answer is that there's another response, and it's not this. But to me, there's no question that even the Mifarshim, the Rishonim, that are saying that it doesn't mean that that's not how we analyze a man-made disaster. Okay? Let's carry on. And we'll see exactly this maybe in the next part of the Mishnah. Ezu dever. What we just mentioned, that if there's a dever, there's a plague in the city, so then there's a halakha. What do we say if there's a plague in the city? V'chen ir, right? Sheyesh ba dever. What does that mean? What's considered dever? Ir hamotziah 500 ragli. Any city that has 500 people, v'yatzeu mimena gimal metim, 3 people died from this plague, begimal yamim ze achar ze, 3 days, one after the next, harei ze dever. So you have 3 deaths per 500 people, right? And it happens in a consistent way, one day after the next. Harei ze dever. Pachot mikan, less than that, it's not dever. There's a sickness, there's a challenge, but a sickness and a challenge doesn't necessarily mean anything. It doesn't mean that it's a dever, that it's a plague. So we're categorizing how much a plague is. Okay.
Was there corona fasting?
It's a good question. That's the first thought that came to my mind when I studied this Mishnah. I don't remember any corona fasting. I don't remember it. And I think we'll see why maybe a little bit later in the Masechet, okay? Now, so this idea of Yatz'u min hagimel metin, arei ze dever. Less than that, en ze dever. Now, it seems from the stamiyut of the Mishnah that everyone agrees that this is the case. Now, just one thing I want to point out. Whenever you say a city that puts out ragli, 500 ragli, it doesn't mean 500 souls. It means, like we count in the Torah. How do we count in the Torah? What's the census?
Only men.
Between the ages of 20 and 60. So the average sized city that had a force, an army of 500 people on its defense force, that means that's a city that's far larger, right? Than what's it called? Than what you might have thought of initially. So a city that has 500 people and 3 people die day after day, that's 3 and 500, simple maths. But a city that has 500 people protecting it, that's only able-bodied men. That means that there's at least 500 women the same age. That means that there's at least however many children, men and women, boys and girls, lower than that age. At least, that many people above that age. So you're talking about a much smaller percentage. Now, what's interesting is that there seems to be a she'elah as to who has to pass away in order for this to be considered a dever. Because we said over here that 3 of them, right?
But they're passing away from the same reason? It's for example, I'm sure here there's a lot more than 3 people passing away every day on a consistent basis.
Right, but it's not at that rate. It's not 3 per 500, right?
Could be close to.
Maybe in Corona, yes. I wouldn't assume in a normal scenario that that you're in a city. Because remember, this number is given in a way where it would indicate that there actually was a plague, right? But let's go one step further. When it says over here, and the yatzeu mimena gimal me'etim, what does it mean mimena? Mimena could mean from the city, or mimena can mean from the 500. Now, what logic would there be that it's only called a plague if men die? It's not a plague if women die? The point is that these 500 men, they were men that we knew to be able-bodied and healthy. So if you have a random woman dying or a random child dying, we don't know. They had typhus, they had scurvy, they had black plague, they had bubonic plague, they had all sorts of things running through the city. So you only know that it's something to do with a plague if people that you know that are healthy are passing away. And that's actually the psak of the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, let's carry on. And less than that, en zeh dever. Now the Mishnah says, what do we, now, because all of that was talking about this people of that city and the people in the surrounding cities. But now the Mishnah goes to a much wider lens. For this, we require the atzeret tefillah for everywhere. When we talk about the boiling hot winds that come with the sharav in Israel, and that wind could dry out and destroy everything, and it's blowing through, it could really destroy the entire crops. When the crops, they start turning a certain color, and again, that just is a barometer. The yellow of the yerek, of the greenish yellowish yirakon, comes when there's not enough water for the crops to ripen normally. So again, it's a massive, extensive drought. Val ha'arbe for locusts, val ha'chasil, and for another kind of grasshopper. Val ha'chayara'a, and when there's a swarm of wild animals that are attacking people, val cherev, and for armies that come to attack. Matri'in alea, in cases like that, we cry out for those things, and not only is it that local city that does it and the one next to it, but it's much wider. The Mishnah answers the reason is because it's a disaster that's travelable. It travels, So since it's mobile, this disaster, and you don't know where it will stop. If this army, destroys our town, then gets enough resources in our town to eat, to fill up, to rearm, they move on to the next town. But then what happens when they conquer the next town? Then it's the next and the next and the next. So the fact that you are 5 towns over and you're not included in the surrounding towns, it doesn't help when there's a makam mahalechet. Earlier in the Mishnah, we were talking about where there was a local problem with water, but not on a statewide, not on a countrywide level, not on a region-wide level. When we're talking about things in the region that could easily spread, so there we understand, obviously, that everyone's in the same boat, and everyone would be, now just pay close attention, and we'll cover that later, but it says, Al elu matri'in b'chol makom. It doesn't say matri'in umit'anin. Correct?
Correct.
So we'll come back as well to that when, hopefully later in the Gemara. Ma'aseh she'adu zekenim Yerushalayim. There was a case where the zekenim came down from Yerushalayim Arehem, the gazru Taanit. So the rabbis got together in Yerushalayim. That's where they got together in the Beit Din. But then they went back to, each one went back to their towns. The Yaradu is always a term that we use with regards to Yerushalayim, even though there might be places that are higher technically than Jerusalem, right? But like, I don't know, what if a rabbi lived in, what's the place where they go skiing? In the Hermon, right? Still, we would call it Yaradu, because Yerushalayim is the Pisgah. It's considered the highest spiritual height. They went down from Jerusalem to their cities, and they declared a Taanit, al shenir'ah kimelopi tanur shidafon be'ashkelon. Because there was a limited amount of this hot wind that was coming through. How much was it? Kimelo pitanur, like the size of the opening of an oven. I guess when you open an oven, you get that blast of hot air. That's what they felt. And because they found it in Ashkelon, okay, or that was maybe the amount that they were able to see its effect. All right, and that's further down in Eretz Israel. And they were worried it would spread everywhere. So you see that they declared a public fast for Shidafon, supporting the Mishnah's idea before. They also had a Taanit. There was an attack of two wolves that they attacked two children across by the Yarden. Now, again, I'm assuming that we're talking about over here the portion of Eretz Israel that was added on to Eretz Israel on the other side of Yarden, which is for the two Shevatim, for Reuven, for Chatzi Shevet Menashe, right? Sorry, Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe. So those 2.5 tribes, they took up residence outside of Israel past the Yarden. So that was also the territory, and that was considered again a wild animals attack, and they assumed that would spread, throughout, or they were worried maybe that would spread. So since it's a traveling makkah, they gave what's it called
Doesn't the river act as a barrier?
That's
Especially
probably
for
the
wild animal.
That's probably the chidush that the Mishnah is trying to communicate by telling us where the two ze'evim were. Probably trying to tell us exactly that point. That even if it's not something that you would have imagined, would have spread, even if there's less of a reason to imagine a spread, still we would say, we would say this concept. All right. Carries on the Mishnah. So, Rabbi Yosef said, Lo al she'achelu, ela al she'nir'u. In order to declare a fast for wild animals attacking, they didn't need to see that they actually ate or devoured the children. It was enough to see that they were roaming the streets. What's the calamity that they're roaming the streets? The answer is that normally, like the Pasuk says, there's a fear that animals have of human beings. Even more so, the Pasuk tells us when the Jewish people are doing what they're supposed to do, there's a fear on all of the creations of the world of a person who's Shomer Torah Mitzvot. So to see wolves in the streets is already a sign that the protection had waned and that they were brazen enough to be walking around amongst the people. The devouring of the children was of a soft target was something that was only going to be a matter of time from that perspective. So Rabbi Yosef, he explains that the takana was even if not, no one had actually, that if anything had actually occurred. Okay? Now the Mishnah continues. Al ele matri'im b'Shabbat. There's these certain cases that we're matriya on Shabbat. All right? Al ir shikifu anochrim. If you have a city that was surrounded by non-Jews, and at the time we're talking about the non-Jewish people around there there's a very belligerent nature to the relationship between the Jews and their neighbors. So you could only assume that the worst is coming. So even though it's Shabbat and we would normally not fast or say these difficult prayers on Shabbat, that's why we add in the Refuah Shlema, we say Shabbat hi milizok Refuah Karova lavo, because you're not really allowed to offer supplications like that on Shabbat. So therefore, in an extreme case, even on Shabbat we be matriya isha yikifu anochrim or nahar, or if the river is overflowing its banks, and you could see that Bar Minan, if it kind of goes a little bit further, you could have a terrible flood in the city. Or if you're on a ship, a boat, and the boat is being thrown around on the waves, and again, it's a matter of time before Bar Minan, the wrong size wave, comes and capsizes the boat. In all those cases, Rabbi Yosef says, we would fast. Rabbi Yosef says, le'ezra v'lo le'tze'aka. We're allowed to pray that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us, but v'lo le'tze'aka, but not with an extreme, not dialing up, if you will, to an extreme form of tefillah. What's the nafkamina between these two? So let's look at Rashi. Rashi explains. Where did I see this? Not Rashi.
There's 18.
Here, sorry. You see over here at the bottom? Likutei Rashi. Second wide lines. Litzeaka, le'ezra. Tzoakin lebnei adam. You see it? In the Likutei Rashi?
Oh, no, I get that. Okay. Yeah.
Tzoakim, Likutei Rashi is just Rashi from other places where the Gemara is similar. Le'ezra. Tzoakin lebnei adam. Sheyavo le'ezram. They call out to other people to come to their aid. Lo le'tzeaka, but not tefillah. She'enanu bituchim kol kach sheto'il tefilatenu litz'ok alehem b'Shabbat. We're not as certain whether or not the tefillah will be answered at this juncture. Maybe we don't deserve it. Maybe we're not praying hard enough. Maybe whatever. In which case, you prayed on Shabbat. You did this tze'aka on Shabbat. And it was for nothing. Mipi mori. That's what Rashi says the name of his master, his teacher. Lashon acher, another expression. Le'ezra. Dika'amar tanakama matri'in demasha bekol ram. Out loud. They're screaming. Out loud at tefillah. Va'amar le'Rabbi Yossi le'ezra shemutpalim kol echad bebeto le'ezra be'alma. Person can pray privately, quietly le'ezra. Everyone should pray that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should save us. But to pray in the public way, with the crying and with the shliach tzibur, to do it in that way, we don't do. That Rabbi Yossi says we don't do it on Shabbat.
Is this for people that were on a boat on Shabbat, or for people in a town that are looking at the boat in the ocean on Shabbat?
I think it's the people on the boat itself. Yeah?
You don't think that they were really in that situation, that they would be screaming and crying out loud?
So the screaming and crying that the person is praying as a yachid is still the tefillah of Ezra.
Ah, okay.
What we're talking about tze'akah is when there's an organized communal prayer with maybe all of the laws as well that we talked about with the special berachot, etc., etc. Okay? Again, we'll have to see, what else was allowed in the Gemara when they said al elu matri'in b'Shabbat. Because remember, matri'in can mean praying out loud, crying out loud, but it also carries a connotation of blowing the shofar. Did they blow the shofar? We don't blow the shofar of Rosh Hashanah on Shabbat. Okay, midoraita. So let's see. We'll see in the Gemara. Shimon Atemani Omer. Shimon Atemani says, Af ala dever. Also, when it comes to dever, to this plague, also we'll cry out. We'll do the tze'akah on Shabbat. And the rabbis, they didn't agree that on a dever was something that was kedai to do it for. Now let's go back. Any type of tzara that comes on the community, whenever we say about something bad happening, we always use the negative. We use inverse language. Like when someone's cursing God, we say Mevarechet Hashem. Something you don't want to say, so you don't say it. So he said, Al kol tzara shelo tavo ala tzibur. That should not come to the community, okay? Matri'in alehem, we do this crying out, with all the connotations of what that means. Chutz mirov gishamim. Except when we're talking about an excess of rain. Because when there's an excess of rain, that could also ruin all the fruit in the field. Except that that's something that you could actually save the crops. You take buckets, you move the crops away, you do the thing. There's other things to do. You build areas around, you build something up around. So it's a tremendous amount of work, but it's something that you could actually protect your fields from. But for that we're not going to institute a matri'in aleim. Maaseh, there was once a case. They went to Choni the Ma'agal. Hitpalel shedu gishamim. They asked him to pray that it should fall the rain. Go get the ovens that you have to bring the Korban Pesach. Everyone has their ovens. We have now pizza ovens. They had Pesach ovens, okay? The Pesach oven, bring them up, In order, what are they made out of? They're made out of mud. And then when they fire the ovens, the mud becomes very hard. But if you add water to them, if there's an excessive amount of water, they'll come apart. Bring in the ovens. They're in the middle of a drought. He's telling them to bring in the ovens because they're going to be destroyed from the rain. Hitpalel v'lo yardu gshamim. He prayed, and the rain did not fall. Ma'asa, what did he do? Ag uga, he drew this circle around him in the dirt. All your children, they turn to me. Sha'ani kiben bayit lefanecha, because I'm someone that I'm always, present in your home. Nishba ani b'shimcha agadol. I swear in this moment in your name, that I'm not going to move from the circle until you have mercy on your children. The rain started to drop a little bit, to fall. Amar lokach sha'alti. Choni says to God, that's not what I asked for. Wild. First of all, listen to this conversation. Lokach sha'alti. I asked for enough rain, not only for the crops, but like we said earlier, for all the reservoirs. The rain started to pour like you can't believe. Amar lokach sha'alti. Goldilocks he wants. I didn't ask for that either. Rains that represent HaKadosh Baruch Hu's desire, that he loves the Jewish people, that he's doing it with beracha, with kindness. Yardu kitiknan. The rains started to fall exactly as they would. First of all, could you imagine meteorologist Choni Ma'agal? He could tell you exactly what was going to happen, and if it didn't happen, he's like, this is Memorial Day weekend. Lokach sha'alti. It's a little too muggy. I want it to be nicer, right? Okay. Yardu kitiknan. Beautiful.
Oh my God, was this like the first time he did the circle, or like this was like a constant thing in this house?
It's not constant, but we have more than one recorded case of him being ma'agal. Okay? Amar lahem. Sorry. When did this happen? The Jews left Yerushalayim to go upwards to Harabayit because it was the highest part of Jerusalem because of the rains. So it fell at a beautiful pace, but it fell until it was too much. Same way you prayed, that they should fall down from the sky. Pray now that the excess rain that we've got, that should go. He said to them, go out now and see, tell me. There was a certain stone called the stone of those that got lost. We'll discuss what that means. If that's covered, if the stone of the to'in is covered, let me know. Okay? Otherwise, I'm not going to do it. Shalach lo Shimon ben Shetach. So the Gemara does not record that they came back to him, indicating that stone was not disappeared. This stone appears in Masechet Baba Metzia, where they would stand on it and announce, they would come and say that the people that lost objects, they should come over there. Okay? However, so this stone, it was a marker. In this story, it served as a marker for how high the water was. If they didn't come back, one would assume that it was not the case. Shalach lo Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach, who was the head of the rabbis at the time, said in the message, if not for the fact that you were Choni HaMa'agal, Gozrani Alecha, I would have declared on you a nidui. I would have put you in cherem. It's not a small thing. Excommunicated him. No one coming for Amot, not allowed in the Bet Knesset, all sorts of crazy things people would say about him. He's in Minudeh. You can't do business with him. What should I do to you? Because you act in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that way. You act in a way which is inappropriate. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu still does what you want. Like a son who says, Dad, come on. I'm hungry. Let's go get pizza. Right? And the kid got, and what does the dad do? Dad takes the kid. Because the kid's hungry. Still he does what he wants. And on you the pasuk says, Yismach avicha ve'imecha v'tagel yoladetecha. Your father and your mother should be happy, v'tagel yoladetecha, and the one that gave birth to you should rejoice. I think the meaning of bringing this pasuk was that he was saying that when a parent is so full of joy that in the child that they have, nothing the kid says ruins that joyous moment, right? You're at your daughter's wedding and your younger kid comes and says, I'm starving, it's so stupid. You don't lose your mood at the wedding because you're in such a happy mood. You tell him, come here, Rochi, let me get you what you want. Come, someone take care, get this kid a plate with a big smile on your face. Back, I love you.
Goes up everywhere.
Right? So only if they drink those Shirley Temples, right? Too many of them, and then they have red throw up. Okay. My point, Rabotai, is that I think what Shimon ben Shetach was communicating was he said, "Look, what can I do with you? You're like that Yeled Shovav that the kid loved, the father loves. He puts him on his lap. He does whatever he wants. But think how inappropriate it sounds. What Chonia Ma'agal was saying. I'm not. But more than that, I'm not leaving. Fadda, stay there forever. Azal Baruch. Yeah, get him a coffin, let him be buried there. Who talks to God like that, right? And then he goes, and then he escalates. God gives him what he wants. Now, what's interesting to me as well is that you see clearly from the end of the conversation that it's not that Chonia Ma'agal is a spoiled child saying, "This is what I want." No, I didn't ask for it, because technically he should also have said, "I did not ask for the people of Jerusalem to need to come up to Harabayit because there's too much rain in their area, because their houses are getting flooded." He doesn't say that. When his lokach sha'alti is not spoiled, his lokach sha'alti is the people, they came to me to pray to you. They're having a drought. They don't only need in their crops, like we said earlier. If it doesn't go borot sichin me'arot, matriin. So that's what I'm doing. They don't have what they need. You're raining too little, it's not enough. You're raining too much, now it's people are going to die.
We just learned also just above that if it's too much, it could be, you can have avoidance. You could dig a hole, trenches.
So what I'm pointing at is exactly that. When he says later, that's not what I want again, and Hashem gives him geshem nidava, but it still rises up. This rising up is that annoyance. But the zaf was not the annoyance. The zaf was a danger. So he says, Lokach sha'alti. So once you see the end of this, where he refused to pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the stop, which is really what the point of the Gemara's story here is, because we ended off by saying, but not on, you don't cry, for chutz mirov geshamim, because it's just an annoying, it's a burden, and we're not praying for a burden, we're praying for things which are super necessary or sakana. So then you understand that I don't like the zaf, was not Choni saying, I don't like how you're doing this. It was more about the fact that too little, they're still in a drought. It's serious. Too much, they're in a flood. Serious. Shitafon. Not shidafon, shitafon. Right? But then when it came to too much, at that stage, we don't do it. But now there's another answer to that, I think, as well. We're going to see a second answer to why he didn't pray for the rain to disappear.
Who was Chon? Meaning, we have no...
One of the Tanaim.
Okay. So we have no... He was just a Tana and then...
One of the Tanaim who's famous in the Gemara.
Was also on the Tanaim?
Yeah. So what's it called? Choni Ma'agal was one of the Tanaim, and he was famous specifically for the incredible power of his tefillah, of his prayer. Okay? There's other stories as well the Gemara discusses and describes with regards to Choni Ma'agal. Okay. Let's finish the Mishnah, and then we'll end for today. Let's say they started fasting, and boom, immediately the answer to their prayers comes, and before they even get to Netzahama, right, it starts raining. Okay, they're fasting from Alot HaShahar, and now it's not yet the sunrise, and already starts raining. Lo yashlimu. They don't have to continue fasting. Le'achar Netzachama. Let's say it falls after Netzachama. Yashlimu, they have to fast. Indicating that as the Gemara is going to explain, indicating that if it happens after Netzach Hama, it's still like a message that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not. If it was before Netzach Hama, we perhaps read it as HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying, no, you don't have to fast, by making the speed between Alot and Netz. But if it comes after Netz, so then that's, and for the rest of the day, obviously, Yashlimu. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, no, Kodem Chatzot Lo Yashlimu. This idea that God is answering their prayers extends all the way to Chatzot. It means God saying, no, I don't want you to fast. So therefore they wouldn't do it.
And it's not only that day, but the series, if they're in the middle of the series.
No, no. All we know over here is that on that fast. Le'achar chatzot. What if it comes after chatzot? Yashlimu. Then they finish the fast. Okay, let's finish. Ma'aseh shekazu ta'anit b'Lod. There was a case that in the city of Lod, there was a ta'anit that they made a gezerah. And the rain came and fell for them before chatzot. Amar lehem Bitarfon said, go out, eat, drink, and make it even a holiday. So it's not just the elimination of the fast, it's even to go dial it up. They went out, they ate, they drank, and they had a beautiful celebration. Okay? And they came in the afternoon, they came back and they recited Hallel. We'll actually see in the Gemara, what does that mean? How could they have recited Hallel? Doesn't that contravene doesn't that contravene the halachot of Hallel? And we'll see exactly, the Gemara is going to explain that exactly what this Hallel consisted of. Okay, Be'ezrat Hashem will continue on Wednesday.